Hello, heroes. Welcome. Today, I wanted to talk about parental alienation, where it get into the tragic situation where people get killed. So I wanted to give a warning before anybody join this call. There may be discussion that can be very disturbing, it can be graphic, and it could be very distressing. So I want you to make your personal judgment before you joining on this call, because like I mentioned, the discussion is going to go into the topics of suicide, murder, involving children. So it's very tragic day. Unfortunately, I am very grateful that we have Jing and Jason here, who are the parents that I really can't say enough about your courage and your strength to be here to share your story. These are the parents that actually lost their children through parental alienation. And I'm not just talking about the figuratively losing their children, they actually lost their children due to murder by the alienators. On this call, we also very honored to have Dr. William Bernet, who is a forensic psychiatrist. He's a president of the Parental Alienation Study Group, and he's a professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at the Vanderbilt University Medical Center. So thank you everyone for being here. I'm grateful for you to being here. So now I know that this topic is very tragic and it's very heartbreaking, and it's a difficult topic to talk about, but it's also so important for us to talk about this because we need to shed the light into the malice, the extreme, the tragedy that can happen to our children out there if we don't address this problem, this very serious public health crisis here. So thank you so much for being here. Now, so as you know, like normally, if you were to create a movie or something, you wanted to keep the ending to the end, but I'm gonna just reveal the ending like you guys already know. So in this case, Jing has a son, and her son was murdered by her ex-husband when the son was 10 years old. And Jason have a son and a daughter, and the children were murdered by his wife, his estranged wife. So that's the ending that we already know. So the thing is that you can hear this story and you can see these stories on the news. So you can look into these cases, but there's a lot of things behind the scene, and that's what we wanted to dig in today. The kind of family dynamics, the behaviors, what was going on, the false allegations and things like that. Now, I wanted to share though, before we go into the actual interview, is so with Jing's case, there was a lot of departments that were involved, really any kind of authorities that you could imagine, from the Department of Human Services, the police, the sheriff, the DA office, etc., etc. So after her son passed, they had the Department of Human Services actually had an investigation that took nearly a year into the investigation to determine the cause, determine the system gap. So I wanted to share with you guys part of their report, at least it's the highlight of it that I wanted to share with you guys. So I wanted to share with you here. This here, what I'm showing you on the screen is, like you can see here, it said non-confidential. So this is a child fatality report that was done by the Department of Human Services. And so I just want to highlight a few key things that is relevant today. So near the end of the report, you see one thing that they mentioned here is that the team, the child fatality review team, identified a systemic gap in the Colorado Children's Code in that there is no inclusion of domestic violence or parental alienation in the child abuse and neglect definition. So they noted that there's a gap in the system because they did not recognize parental alienation in their definition of child abuse. And then you go on to the end of the report where they talk about recommendation. And one of the recommendations they said is that this child fatality review team recommended proposing and supporting a legislative change for domestic violence and parental alienation to be included in the Colorado Children's Code definition of abuse and neglect. Now, that seemed like a great thing that they actually recognize this problem and they recommend that this to be fixed. And as we're going to discuss later on, you're going to see, unfortunately, the system continue to fail Jing's family as well as actually all the victims of parental alienation out there. So anyway, let's just get this started. I wanted to actually, before we talk about the stuff that's going on, I wanted to hear about the children. Jing, would you share with us what was highlight?
He was a, I'll say, the way I want to say, he was very happy, very goofy. He tends to not take things very serious a lot of times, as most of the boys. But the way, because the family dynamic, how we raised him as a family, unfortunately, he's kind of learned at a very early stage of what is the best way to make certain statements, for almost like a little manipulative, very carefully choosing his words or his answers to certain type of questions, just to avoid getting himself in trouble.
Right, thank you. So I actually had the pleasure to interview not just Jing, but honestly, hundreds of people in her case on both sides of the family, Jing as well as her ex-husband. And anyone that knew Tai, I mean, I felt like I knew this boy. He's such a loving, sweet little boy that was caught in the middle, and you could tell how he struggled so much, and he tried to survive, and he tried to protect Jing at the same time. You could tell, even in his rejection of Jing, it was in the protection of her. And it's devastating to see. And I had videos of him and had photos of him, and I felt like I knew him. So it's really sweet and it's really heartbreaking. Jason, what about you? Would you like to share about your children?
They were so young. They were 5 and 3. Robbie, my son, was just perfect. He was just a perfect little boy. He was so much fun. He was very, very thoughtful kid. He was always thinking about his big sister. She was just really, really smart, and a lot of fun to have around. And at that age, you're just starting to see, the potential for personality that comes out. And Robbie, he's my buddy. You shouldn't be buddies with your kids. Robbie was anybody's buddy. He didn't care. I own a store. I own a homebrew supply business where I frequently have customers coming in, strangers and that kind of thing. And there's such a warm conversation that's between myself and customers. It was not uncommon for him to spend about 30 seconds, looking up at, me and customers interacting, and he'd run to the customer and have him pick him up. Like, oh, it's my new friend. Yeah.
I see in the chat room where Carolyn said, thank you to the parents for sharing your absolutely heartbreaking stories. Really, yeah, thank you, you guys. There's so much courage and strength and, resiliencies for you guys to be here. Thank you. So let's talk about your relationship with your ex. So like with Jing, let's talk about even before things turned south. What was he like? Like, what was his characteristic? We're talking about the alienator here for the audience. And you guys in the chat room, if you have questions, please let us know. And also, I would love to hear where you are coming from. So please put in the comments so that we have an idea of where our audience is coming from. Go ahead, Jing. Yes.
So when we first got married, the dating stage was great. We dated for a couple of years before we actually got married. I met all his families, and there was some talks about, his behaviors and the controlling personality, but nothing really from my experience that was really alarming me. So we got married. Things were going well until pretty much the time that after I gave, or right before I gave birth to my son. So before Ty was born, there were comments about like he almost feel like a Ty could be a burden in our relationship. There's certain discussion or communication about, don't he just kind of want me to favor him more than my son if there's any kind of conflicts down the road. So there was those kind of, but then towards me though, there was never aggressions or violent behaviors. He's, every birthday holidays and give me presents and things like that. It was, pretty routine stuff. And then feel like outside people felt like we were really in a good spot as a couple. And then things got a lot worse as Ty got older. But the relationship was more of, he was more aggressive towards Ty as far as when there's certain behavior issues with Ty. He just used very harsh punishment on Ty. And then to keep the relationship at peace, almost, I kind of have to give up a lot of grounds to just in order to keep that peace, because I felt like if I was the one to trigger more conflicts, and there would be more harsher treatments on Ty. So at least that was the way I felt like the best I could of keep things going as smooth as possible back then. So after the divorce, he became from this just kind of really didn't care much about me or Ty's life kind of party to this try to make everything as miserable as he could on Ty and me. And then he tried to
Sounds familiar.
Gets very close with Ty, like getting him more presents, taking him more places and doing more fun stuff, which just never happened in Ty's life. When we got divorced, Ty was like 5 or 6. So he just became this very loving parent, and then tried to talk to me about, let's get back together. I'm gonna change, and apologetic. We would take like family trips together, things like that. And then as time progressed, and when I kind of made my decision, like we're not ever gonna actually go back as a family, and then his tone changing to this, mom, mama broke our family. She's the bad one, basically. So in Ty's opinion, like, why did you yell at daddy? Why did you do, or papa, that's what he called him. Why did you do this? Like I was the bad parent during the whole time that when Ty was with both of us. So that was kind of how the things just, then after that, it's just worse and worse with the alienation.
Dr. Bernet, I mean, before we go to Jason, do you have any comments or anything that you wanted to?
Well, I really, really appreciate Jane and Jason being here today, because it's very hard.
Thank you.
Kind of a perspective on how we define things and how we think about these families. Parental alienation, usually it means the condition of the child. In other words, the child is alienated from one of the parents. And so it's the mental condition of the child in which the child has a false belief about the parent, that the parent is evil or not lovable. But we can also use parental alienation to describe the family dynamic, and where there's a mom and a dad and a child or maybe children. And so when we think about it in that terms, we think about everybody having a role. And the typical role, of course, of the child, I've already mentioned, the child's role is very confusing because he is caught between these two parents who are in this big battle. And what is he supposed to do? And is he supposed to be on this side or that side? It's very, very confusing. And the children seek a solution, and the solution is to go one side or the other. So, but when we think about it as a family dynamic, so that's the child, and then there's the alienating parent who almost always, as it plays out, maybe not in the beginning, but as it plays out, the person is angry and resentful and vengeful and self-absorbed and is so selfish that they will do almost anything to keep the children away from the other parent. And of course, in these tragedies, it's the ultimate thing. I mean, it's a murder of the children, and to keep the children away. So you see that pattern in these cases. And then, of course, the third person is the victim parent or the rejected parent. And that person, of course, has their own issues, and they get really discouraged, and they feel helpless and hopeless. And so sometimes they try to find some solution. So there are different ways to think about alienation. And of course, this situation here with these two families is so it's so tragic.
Yeah, so you could kind of notice in what Jean talked about was that the alienator in this case display a certain kind of behavior even way before things got bad. Was that he started to it's always started good, otherwise you wouldn't be ending up in relationship with these people. So there was that love bombing period where she felt like, oh, things are really good, but people that have known him for a long time knew certain kind of pattern of behavior that he had displayed in the past. And so they had already kind of trying to warn her a little bit, but it's hard when you are in the middle of this relationship where you felt love and things like that. It's very hard to see these red flags. So Jason, what about your relationship with your wife, before any of this happened?
To be honest, I gotta say that there wasn't, if there were red flags, I didn't see them. I having spent some time with just since this happened and trying to figure out what was going on, with my wife. I think the consensus we've generally come to is that there was a deep-seated narcissism at work. And we talk about narcissism in day-to-day life, but real narcissists, as it turns out, they're really good at hiding it. I didn't know this. And so it kind of sits there at the background. They're manipulative. I was happy for a lot of it. We had some really great laughs and we had some good times. But along with that narcissism came my mother-in-law, who was living with us. And just to give you some background, my wife was a Russian immigrant. I didn't import her. She was here for 5 years before I met her, and she got her citizenship. She basically grew up in Moscow. My mother-in-law was, of course, spent her entire life under, Soviet rule. My wife's father was Ecuadorian, and he married, my mother-in-law, and then they were together for about, my wife was born, and then he split and he took off back to Ecuador. And basically my wife has no memory of him until she was 18, 19 years old, and she went out to visit him. So there was always this, daddy abandoned us, fill the vacuum as you will type thing. When things, a hard time for us was really financial and business related. And it just didn't take off as fast as we wanted. I was in the Navy. I left the Navy to come down here to Mississippi to start this business. My parents liked it and they jumped in and became partners with us after just a few months, and we were enjoying it. It just didn't take off as long as as quick as we wanted. But that wasn't good enough. And when I'm at home or I'm at work and I'm trying to make things work, there's my mother-in-law in my wife's ear all day long. I don't stand a chance against that. It doesn't matter what I do when I come home for 2 hours a night. If she's had 8 or 9 hours of my mother-in-law going to work at her, what ended up happening was she basically convinced us all she had a job offer in Texas, and we moved them under false pretenses, setting the stage for it. And feel like a right idiot months later when we find out that there actually wasn't a job. And that was the problem. And I think that toxic influence in your life, where you have somebody who's going to kind of go to work at you to destroy your marriage, destroy your home life, move your kids, write me out completely. And that was really what it was. Once we started going down that road of it was why are you still calling and texting, and don't you know you're just supposed to go away? No, we don't do that here. I'm not going to allow it. I'm not going to let it happen. If you think you're going to write me out, he's my son. She thought it was okay for my son to grow up learning Russian in the house, and he'll learn English when he goes to school. You think, does it occur to you I'd like to talk to my son? And it was okay. Well, you're that guy who's in Ecuador now. And that was and getting through that was just, and that was it was. But we did a really good job. We managed to get into negotiations for, this is in Texas, so things are a little different there than I saw a junior in Colorado. I'm no familiarity with the laws in Colorado, but temporary orders in Texas, we got it worked out for 3 and 3 weeks with my mother-in-law and my wife in Texas, and they'd come back to us here in Mississippi for 3 weeks. Not ideal. It was working pretty well. And that's the way it was for, about a year while the divorce was going through. But it was a difficult thing to fight through. It really, really was. But we did a good job, because when they were here, we kept them busy and we had fun. And we just really, really did have fun with it. So I may have forgotten what the initial question was now, after I've been on that road for a minute or 2 or 10. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, no, that's fine. So
Okay.
in Jason's situation, if you guys pay attention, you notice that the alienators actually is the mother-in-law, and then the wife participate along with that campaign of alienation, and it has this whole campaign of denigration. So Jason, if you don't mind, could you share a little bit the kind of things that your mother-in-law was talking to your wife about you, because she was trying to put you down the whole time and trying to minimize your role.
I'm sure she was. And that's just because the nature of the history between her and her, the abandonment with her husband. And I'm sure it was. It's just keep in mind that a lot of this was happening in the room, and I didn't realize what was going on. It was happening in a foreign language. There was a lot of subtle stuff there that was going on. I think there's a lot of manipulation that, even if it did manifest itself verbally, I wouldn't call it. And a lot of it wasn't verbal at all. It was too, and it was happening in the house, in the room, and you didn't really know it. That's my suspicion. Keep in mind that I'm, to a certain extent, I'm trying to make sense out of those clues and those little bits that I have as best I. So.
Yeah, and then also another.
Go ahead, Mr. I'm sorry, Mr. Williams. You had a question for me.
I kind of sense a common denominator that both Jason and Jean are describing, which is this feature of people being controlling or coercive, and that's a feature of domestic violence. Domestic violence is not always beating up on somebody, but a really common factor is that the other person becomes very controlling, and sometimes it's very subtle, and sometimes it's even backwards, like the love bombing of the child for Jean and Jean's for Ty, is a way of controlling.
Do kids see through that though? I would imagine kids see that and they know exactly what's going on really quick. Usually,
no,
it's like 10 years
I think
old.
at the beginning it's great. I think children love to get whatever they can get, but I do think that can be a red flag in relationships if the other person is controlling how I think and what I do. And in Jason's case, even what I know, because they're talking some other language. Incidentally, this story has happened in other families. Like the grandmother gets involved and kind of is the architect of the whole thing. And this thing about the foreign language happens in other families. I've had families where it's the exact same thing, where the mother and her mother were from a European country, and they communicated together, excluding, and the mother taught the child the language so that she and the child could only speak in that language. So, but I do think it's as far as a red flag goes, this idea of having a person who's very coercive or controlling is something to watch out for.
Can I throw in here real quick for Jing? Your description of your husband after you got married while your son was growing up reminds me very much of my father, in that not emotionally all there necessarily. And after my folks got divorced, he ended up becoming a very emotionally, verbally manipulative and abusive person. And even before that, he was someone who just didn't really have a real good time at holding things together. It almost sounded like your description was of when your son was growing up, was that you were almost mediating and refereeing a fight between two kids instead of a grown-up and his son.
Sure.
That struck me as, hey, I think I kind of have an idea what that's like, of someone who can't hold it together. Compartmentalize.
Yes.
Put your stress away. It doesn't belong here. Save it for later. Don't let them know you have it. You're not there to, they're not your grief mop. You're supposed to be letting them do their own thing on their own, not dumping the world's problems on them because you can't handle it. I digress. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Another thing, Dr. Bernet, if you don't mind, if you could comment on this, and we noticed this in Jason's case, both through his wife as well as his personal case, that we had some signal of the transgenerational issue here, which is, we actually, Jason and I had a conversation before where we couldn't even quite figure out if his wife, in fact, is actually a targeted child, an alienated child, rather than an abandoned child. That's something that we suspect. And finally, we saw that Jason himself was subjected to alienating behavior. So if you don't mind, we could comment on this transgenerational issue when it comes to parental alienation.
We talked about it a little bit, but I'm not exactly sure which section of that we were focusing on. Can you refresh my memory a little bit?
No. I'm asking Dr. Bernet, actually.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
The transgenerational thing is fascinating, because there is certainly a tendency for this kind of thing to run in families, and it happens in different ways. One is what Jason described, where a grandparent has this fixed idea and they impose it on their child, usually the daughter, and then the two of them together implement parental alienation. So that's one way that it goes through generation. Let me tell you another way. Let me see if I can do this. I think I can have this straight. Suppose there's a boy, and the boy grows up and is alienated from his father. Well, his mother has very specific personality traits. She's manipulative, she's beautiful, but she's also untruthful. She probably has mood swings, and she is very needy for certain kinds of relationships. I mean, this is sort of a research type answer, that these mothers tend to be like that. Well, the boy grows up, he's alienated from his dad, so he grows up with his mother, and he turns 20 or 25 or 30, and he's dating. And who does he date? He dates people who are similar to his mother. And then what happens? His wife alienates him from his children. In other words, he was alienated as a child, and now he becomes the alienated parent. And that's been described in some research studies. In other words, I'm not just making that up, but that's another way that this passes from one generation to another. And of course, what's to do. I mean, the to do, and we need to talk about this, I guess, is education and help people see that this can happen and to watch out for it.
Right. So in Jason's case, his wife was what I truly believe is actually alienated from her father, because her mother said to her that, oh, your father abandoned us, and essentially she grew up without her father and just assumed that he was bad and he didn't want her. So that, it's difficult to truly understand whether she was abandoned or whether she was alienated. But if we look at the grandmother's behavior, it's very likely that she was actually alienated instead of being abandoned. And
Yeah.
then, right. And then Jason himself, growing up as a child of divorce, he was also subjected to alienating behavior from his father. So there's that aspect. And research, like Dr. Bernet was just mentioned, research showed that if you are subjected to parental alienation, chances that your children will grow up to become either an alienator or an alienated parent, unfortunately. That's one aspect of the transgeneration think of it. I see in the comment, Brian said that was me. I was alienated as a child and now I'm the alienated parent. Carolyn said, yes, we need education. Stuart said, yes, Bill, I've seen this pattern in fathers making the same mistake twice and litigating over two sets of children in court. Crystal said, my alienator was an alienated child. So yeah, we see this and parents see this in their personal experience, but this is also shown in research as well. Another aspect I wanted to point out with Jing's case, which is very common, is that the alienators themselves actually it's not about the child. It's not because they love the child so much that they try to take the child. It's actually not that, because you can see initially, Jing's ex-husband didn't even want the child initially. Later, the child is just really a weapon, a tool that he can use to control Jing. And Jing didn't mention, but when they first got divorced, he actually didn't even want Jing because he had a plan to create a relationship with another woman in China. So he actually signed this document that allowed Jing to go anywhere Jing wanted, and he didn't want anything to do with the child, and he took off and went to China. Now, things only turned bad when that didn't work out, and he came back to the US, and now he's counting on Jing to come back to him. And when she said no, that's when things just turned horrible, because he is like the spoiled child. Like, if I don't get what I want, I'm going to destroy everyone around it. So let's talk about the alienating behavior. Now, in Jing's case, there was a lot going on, from he's stalking her and I'll let her clarify all this, creating fake dating profile, stalking her, making complaint to her work to the point that she has to resign, and then involve her new partner in false allegation. Let's talk about some of those things, Jing.
So I think it's just all his behaviors, the only reason is just the controlling. So as all these years passed, we all learned the domestic violence and the behaviors of that is coercive control and manipulation. So in my story, initially, when I first, since our divorce agreement basically said I could move anywhere I wanted to with Ty. So once his harassment behavior started, which is him keying our cars, this is all happened after he found out I was dating someone in a relationship. So keying our cars, he was filing false police reports saying my then boyfriend was sexually abusing Ty, was being very difficult on the parenting time with me, and being the facts that he actually had quite a bit of money to be able to fight me in court, where I didn't, month to month or the week to week paycheck. So so that's how he was kind of, pushing me or trying to gain his control by that way. And then end up, I tried to file police reports and kind of got blown away multiple times. And so I moved back. This is all happening back in Florida. This is initially where we divorced that. So I figured out, since the divorce agreement saying that I could move away. Being him actually, own a house back then in Florida, and he wanted to move to China all the time. So I thought if I move away far enough that he would just give up. So we moved to Colorado. This was back in 2015. So the day after he found out we moved, actually we had, it's a long story. We had to go through the court because he was falsely accusing me to the family court in Florida that I was getting ready to get Thai moved to China or relocating to China, that he wouldn't be able to see Thai. And then that was his ground of filing the emergency motion and trying to just force me to not having custody time. So as soon as he found out where I was going to move to in Colorado, he sold his house in Florida, put it on the market, and basically was planning on just track us down. And he, of course, harassment of all the constant phone calls and text message and saying that I'm going to be your neighbors forever. You haven't seen, what I'm capable of. You know, I'm crazy or psychotic, kind of just very threatening kind of messages. And so after or during the process, while he was preparing himself moving to Colorado, there was harassment by online posting started. So being a nurse, and I kind of, need to keep a good reputation of be able to keep a nursing license and getting new jobs and sort of stuff like that. So when he started start posting online, of course, this is just, I was really a little panicked thinking about moving to a different place and not able to support myself, and with my son with me. Of course, and after he did finally admit that he was the one doing it, and we all knew that, but we just didn't have any proof. But that was his way. He set up many demands. One of my boyfriend not see Thai, wanting me not to date anyone. There was a bunch of rules that he lined up for me to, for him to not continue on this online harassment. So after we moved to Colorado, or after he moved to Colorado, there's multiple reports to the local police and sheriffs that my then boyfriend was sexually molesting Thai, and this just went on and on and on. And finally, the Child Protective Service got involved because of all the accusations, and we all went under investigations. And so initially, the thing is that they court ordered my boyfriend then not be able to see Thai until he can prove, or until his investigation of this child abuse ended. So DHS got involved, but then at the same time, after the police interviewed both of us, and also there was a couple incidences caused a domestic violence criminal charges also by the local police department for his harassment and stalking and sort of stuff like that. This is gonna for me to, all right, Petra, it's gonna take a long time for me to explain. So tell me, when do you want me to stop? Or
I agree with Jinx. So unfortunately, Jinx's case is one of those cases that we cannot explain this in even the summary of it in the matter of 2 hours, 3 hours, or 10 hours actually, because the tragic experience that Jinx had to live through those 5 years of just constant harassment outside of court and inside the court system. And so Jinx's case, I guess I just want to address some of the alienating behaviors. So he he create false allegation about Jing's new partner, claiming that the new partner sexually molested the child. He create false allegation about Jing, claiming that she is going to kidnap the child and go to China. He also tried to do custody interference. So Jing went to pick up the child at her dedicated time on the court order from the school, and he and his new wife turn up and trying to intervene and interfere and intimidate the child so the child would not go with Jing. And he create multiple false allegations of Jing, being physically, beating up the child in front of the police, at the police station, to the point the police have to view the video and could see that Jing did not hurt the child. So there's so many alienating behavior, in addition to other coercive control behaviors that Jing also mentioned. He created false, allegation about her as a professional nurse. So he created so many websites, and he go onto so many websites where he making all these different posts claiming that she's a pedophile and her new boyfriend's a pedophile. He intimidated all of her family and friends. He stalking and intimidated her new partner's family and friends. He intimidated everybody that was involved in the case, from the Department of Human Services, the people that are involved in there, from the custody supervised visit people, to really everybody involved. This is a really horrific case. And really anything that you could think of in that list of typical alienating behaviors, he had committed. Actually, Dr. Bernet, do you mind if you don't mind, could you list maybe some of these typical alienating behaviors and share that with our audience?
So the one that stands out the most here is the idea is portraying the mother, in this case, portraying the target parent as dangerous, and that the dad found many, many ways of portraying that the mom or her boyfriend was dangerous to Ty. And this behavior it sometimes is directly to the child. In other words, the alienating parent will say to the child, be careful when you visit your mom and her boyfriend this weekend, and if he tries to do anything to you, call me on the phone. So sometimes it's directly at the child, but it can also be directed at people in the community, like law enforcement or child protection people or people in the school. In other words, propagating the idea that the other parent is dangerous goes both to the child and to the public, and then through websites and so on. So that seems to be the one that he was a specialist in, and he used it incessantly.
Thank you so much. And then with Jason case, so Jason actually faced something similar. So while he was thinking that this arrangement of shared custody was working out really well, in fact, the mother and the grandmother were cooking up a plan, and they create false allegation and try to file restraining order or protective order against him. Jason, do you mind sharing some of these things?
No, I can share it. A little different, obvious from Jing, in that it sounds like he was really trying to hurt Jing. And that was the primary, and if it was the alienation to get there to do that, then he was willing to do that. In my case, since it was more of, why are you still here? Don't you know you're not supposed, this kind of silly stuff. When they got around to allegations, it was because their case was falling apart. So we had, even though we had this temporary agreement of shared custody, that was only until divorce was finalized, and we came up with another agreement. In Texas, a divorce case is actually divided or decided by a jury, believe it or not. And the decision of where the kids should live, the advice of that, or I guess the decision of that, really comes down to a family psychologist, which we had was chosen by my wife's attorney, talked to my wife in her office, talked to me in her office, went and visited both places where the kids were at, and spent time there. She spent 2 days with me, treated me terribly, treated me absolutely terribly. And I figured out why later on, was that she's trying to figure out if she can make me angry, kind of figure out what my anger tolerance was, and she never found it. Anyway, So she goes
I
back.
don't think that's a very good interview technique. You know, I've heard of people doing that, and it seems so silly. It's kind of what attorneys do when they have people testify. Anyway, go ahead, but it doesn't sound like a very good interview technique.
Well, since I persevered through it, I'll say that, you know, it was all right. She goes back and she gives a verbal report, not a written report, to the attorneys, and I think to the court as well, saying kids need to go live with dad. And we still live in a day and age where a family psychologist says kids need to be with dad. People go, "Oh my goodness, what happened? Why? What's going on there?" You know, I'm basically living with my parents, running a business, taking all this pressure and stride and everything else, and not surprisingly to me, my wife kind of acted like a lunatic when she got the visit, you know, from the psychologist over there. So I wasn't surprised in the least that they picked the kids to come with me. But after that, hold on a second, sorry, I got a cat. Sorry, Tiger. After that, that's when all of a sudden they had to run to the court on a Friday before we're supposed to exchange the kids, and said, "Oh, well, we've been told that he's doing something inappropriate with Clara." And the courts rightfully smelled a rat right off the bat. The first judge that they talked to said, "Okay, I'm going to go ahead and give you a temporary restraining order until we can get daddy in here and we figure out what's going on." She says, "But this stinks." I think she actually kicked my wife out of the courtroom and told both lawyers, "I'll give you what you want, but this stinks to high heaven." A week later, we're back in with another judge. I had gone over to Texas for the hearing, and I left there with my kids that day. That's how bad the stuff was. It was like, I'll be preface this, but you only get garbage this bad by abusing a 4-year-old. Has no idea what you're asking her, and this wonderful girl just wanted to give you an answer that you wanted. She has no idea what truth and lies is. She's none of that. So they come run into court with this line of he's doing something inappropriate at night when he's sleeping with her, when he's giving her a bath, when they were at family's house over Christmas. He did something inappropriate while giving her a bath when they spent the night over there. And it was garbage in, garbage out. None of it made any sense because I didn't bathe my kids. I would basically, shop closes at 8 o'clock at night. I get home at 8:30. They're finished with their baths an hour before I get home. I don't sleep with Clara. I slept with Robbie. My mother slept with Clara. You know why? Because my wife had asked for that, which I assume came from my mother-in-law, but she said, "We were doing co-sleeping. I want you to sleep with Robbie and your mother to sleep with Clara." Done. I'm getting divorced. I'm going to give you whatever you want. I'm going to create as little ripples as well. I want to make sure that when we go into court, there's nothing substantive you can point at me at all. Okay, I've got based on a bunch of lies. You get whatever you want. As far as Christmas goes, we went over to my sister and brother-in-law's house. We were there during the day. Clara never got a bath. We didn't stay over at night. She played her little head off with her cousins and had a great time. And we left when it was still light out. So how do you get such specific details that are completely wrong? I've got nothing but witnesses backing me up on this. You do it because you want it to be true, and you're peppering a little 4-year-old with a bunch of questions she doesn't understand, and you get garbage. Absolute garbage. This crap that she said that, you know, Clara was afraid of me. Okay, I just videotaped a FaceTime call with her like 3 days ago. You tell me if this kid is afraid of me. We'll play it for the court. I left there with my kids that day. It wasn't about hurting me like it was with Jen. It was about winning. And the winning, and that was it. And there was the desperation. This is what I didn't get. The desperate nature of, oh my God, what am I going to do? I have to run and tell them that daddy's doing something inappropriate. It was dangerous and desperate, and I should have seen it. I wish I had seen it for what it was, which was this person's going to do anything. And eventually when it all fell apart, that's when she decided there's no way out, and she shot everyone in the house.
So with Jason case, I just want to clarify for people that listening, if you didn't pick it up, he's referring to Clara is his daughter who was 4 years old at the time, and Robert is his son who was 2 years old at the time. And by the time they passed, Robert was 3 and Clara was 5. And so the mother created false allegation with the help of the lawyer and the grandmother. Actually, the scheme was cooking up by, unfortunately, the lawyer and the grandmother to claim that he sexually molested his daughter. And the daughter was so confused in this whole investigation that she said all sort of weird things. And then eventually, finally, it came out that the daughter said that my mother said that my father molested me while I was asleep. And she didn't sleep alone. She slept with Jason's mother.
From what I understand, the conversation went something along the lines of, and this is 2 years ago. I got this from the psychologist that interviewed her. Clara would get into enjoying herself and interacting, and then she'd remember what mommy told her she had to say, type thing. And in the course of conversing with this person, she said, "Oh, but I don't like it. Mother touches me or something at night." And or touches me or something like this. And she says, "Well, when does it?" And she says, "When I'm sleeping." And she says, "Well, how do you know that it's happening?" And she says, "My mommy told me." Done there. And the thing was, when these allegations first came up, I was the only one that was kind of happy about this. My lawyer was freaking out. My mother's freaking out. And I'm going, she's overplayed her hand. There's no way you're going to coach a 4-year-old to beat an expert, especially when I have a clean conscience. Go ahead, give it a shot. And I know Clara. I know my little girl very well. And it was, most people know better than to try that. But desperate people don't. Again, there I am. That's what I wish I had some of William's expertise. I'm learning it now the hard way. My children have certainly paid a price for that. And the family's been hurt terribly. But I'm sorry, William, go ahead, bud.
Yeah, Dr. Bernet, do you wanted to add something?
Well, I think we need to talk a little bit about where to go from here. How can we learn from these tragic situations? Is there some benefit to be gained? You described a little bit in Colorado in that the investigation led to the conclusion that parental alienation should be identified and recognized by the personnel in child protection in Colorado. But something that actually Petra and I are both working on a project that involves collecting these cases. If each of you, Jing and Jason, both of your cases had some publicity, and that's partly how people know about it. But there are many of these cases. Some of them have publicity, some of them don't. What we would like to do is to try to collect them. In other words, I don't think anybody has ever tried to do this. I don't think anybody has ever tried to show that the parental alienation dynamic is dangerous, and in extreme cases is even lethal. And what we would like to be able to show is that there's a pattern, at least in some extreme cases, in some severe cases, there's a pattern, and that this is a very dangerous condition, at least sometimes it is. And that we need to kind of pool the information together rather than just look at each one individually. To pool the information and publish it and use it as part of a way to educate mental health people and child protection people and judges. And you can't do it with just 1 or 2 cases. You have to have a kind of a series. And I think that's a research project that we're trying to get off the ground. But in the meantime, I really appreciate Jing and Jason for telling their individual stories. It's wonderful. I guess I was good.
Oh, we're not finished yet, Dr. Bernet. We actually far from finished. I wanted to make sure that we can dig into a lot of different aspects of so one of the things that happen in parental alienation is that the alienator usually doesn't work alone. Alienators will usually go out of their way to recruit flying monkeys, the community of people around to try to isolate the victim and make the targeted parents feel lonely, isolated.
Did you just
hopeless.
coin that term in relation to parental alienation, the flying monkeys?
No, that term is used
That's a
actually.
gene. No, I know where flying monkeys came from, but I've never heard of it related to something like this. It's kind of brilliant.
Yeah, but that's common, right? So if we could talk about this, because I know, for example, with Jean's case, I mean, the campaign of, the mudsliding campaign against her and her new partner, and a lot of people actually fall for this, and they actually participate and help, and particularly his new wife, of course. But then there's also other people. So, Jean, if you don't mind, could you share some of these?
So yeah, so my ex Anthony married this woman from Brazil, and I found out later, Pedro probably already knew that he probably was the one actually got her across the border and over here and got married. This is all happening during the DHS case, the Child Protective Service case. So during that case, of course, and she is, went through this what's it called, reintegration therapy, and with a therapist actually was chosen by DHS. So they went through this whole therapy with this professional, and basically they validated that she is could be this loving parent for Ty, and there's no any concerns and dangers. And so she got involved, and then she became this almost like my ex's, perfect assistance of this whole mind game. So she becomes this witness of his behavior, of testifying. He's this great father. He is this loving parent. Where to the point that, they had Ty calling her mom almost immediately, which, I was like, okay, at least they're having a loving relationship. That's why I was assuming. But and then they started. So she has this, naturally she's blonde. So they started dyeing Ty's hair to this blonde color when he was only like 8-9-year-old. So he's constantly had this blonde hair, just resembling the stepmom all the time. And then, of course, there's no concern for Child Protective Service or any other court system. And then she would, testify saying that Ty is having a bad dreams at home because he's having nightmares about my boyfriend molesting him in court. He's testifying that the ADHD therapy that probably mostly it was because of me. I felt like Ty had some deficits, and then I got him onto therapy for his ADHD. And then stepmom is totally against it because Ty was functioning better with that and probably was able to understand or comprehend more facts than they wanted him to. But she's totally against that, and accusing me of mismedicating my son and all that. And then she's a part of this interference for after Thai schools, and she's the one, like, to me, is just for pressuring Ty not to come home with me. And she would hovering around the school grounds and making false allegations to the police and saying Ty is afraid of me and so on. So there's she's played a lot in this after, towards the end of this whole alienation or domestic violence kind of role.
What did she do, Jane? What happened after the deaths? What happened? What did she do?
Nothing. And I even brought up to the police about, her behavior during this whole process, and they're like, they didn't find anything that she did wrong. And when Ty got killed that night, she was in an apartment. They had this 2-bedroom apartment, and apparently she didn't hear the gunshot or anything. So nobody done anything holding her accountable.
This is
far.
Yeah, I've seen some of this too with mine. The apartment complex In my case, it was 7 gunshots and no one heard anything.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very, yeah, crazy.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, so Jing's case, like there were a number of flying monkeys, but in particular the stepmother, and she, she participated in all this, and without no good reason, because this is not her children. And then the system failed in a way that even though she shouldn't be a party in this case, the system actually gave her custody. So she got the rights of the children, but yet no responsibility, because when this case went through and things became clear, that the child was, she had no responsibility to the death of these children, even though she participated, and the system gave her right. So the system really failed miserably. And I don't even want to touch other things about how we actually, Jing doesn't know this. I've been investigating, I've been working on this case. And so there's a will that left behind by the father, supposedly. And we actually even have authority in handwriting to look at this. And there's a lot of questionable things that going on with that. And I'm not even going to go into that kind of details, but that's not relating to alienation. But yeah, the stepmom is participating, turning up to the school, preventing Jing from being able to pick up her child, making these false allegations and testifying and just horrific stuff. And then there's also so we're talking about that's deliberate, malicious actions. On top of that, there are also other people that are very innocent. So in Jing's case, there were some people who were best friend of the father and the stepmothers. These people were in the same apartment community, and I actually have now interviewed these people, and they have never met Jing. So all they got is the story through the father and the stepmom, and it's crazy because they bought into the story, and so they assume, there's all kind of story about Jing. Oh, Jing is a drug addict. Jing is a prostitute. Jing left Thai and went to China and now live in China. Oh, Jing left Thai and went to Hawaii for drug treatment. Jing, everyone have different story. And it's so crazy because when you interview them, and they all thought, oh, poor Thai, and how good the stepmom and the father to be willing to take care of Thai because Jing abandoned the child. So this is a problem with our society, is nobody stopped and asking the right questions. Everybody just bought onto this and then helped participating in the alienation campaign. And in the meanwhile, the child is caught in the middle. And when you have more people repeating this false narrative to the child, what does it do to the child that's caught in the middle here? And that's a problem with our society when it comes to parental alienation. Jason, what about your case? I'm curious.
Oh no, you just hit a nerve, because I know for a fact that my wife's got plenty of other folks, some of which have been divorced multiple times, as well as other people I'm sure she knew around work, that were more than happy to take whatever narrative she wanted to spin and never challenge her on it. And to an extent, I can understand that. How often do any of us actually stand up to our friends and go, I think you're a little off on this one, or I think you need to rethink that, or you just really missed the boat. You're having a hard time with us, but you've got something wrong. We just don't do that. And to do that with people that we only know at work, or people that we've decided are such wonderful lifelong friends that will do anything for them, we don't necessarily stand up to them when they could be wrong. So to a certain extent, I understand. I hate it, and I really hate it. The fact that my wife could move to another state and introduce her to people and have a narrative, and no one goes, wait a minute, you're divorcing your husband, you've got no allegations of abuse, you've got no drugs, you've got no alcohol, you've got no gambling, you've got no womanizing. What basis do you have for getting a divorce? No one does that. Oh, it was really terrible. It was Mississippi. It was so poor. You couldn't find a job. That's garbage. You do this to your kids and your friends, and no one challenges you on it. And I think everyone in this screen is guilty of that, to point more than we like, not to these destructive ends. This is pretty rare, but it's pretty common. I think this is pretty human thing to do. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try and do better, but sorry, that's my 2 cents.
No, I agree, Jason. And that's the thing is that when you're talking about alienating behaviors, actually a lot of, like almost anybody have seen it, either within their family, within their relatives or their friends or somebody other. Everyone have seen alienating behaviors. But
Yeah.
like Jason said, when was the time that somebody actually stand up and say, hey, that's not right. You shouldn't be saying bad thing about the child's father or mother in front of the child. Or it's not right that you took the child away, or it's not right that you prevent the other parent from seeing the child. People don't stop and do something about it. And even people that should be involving, like the teachers and you know, doctors, things like that, people that should be interfering and they still don't.
Can I ask you a question here real quick? Jane, did you did your ex-husband by chance have any antidepressant use or
No.
antidepressants that were recommended for him? No.
He actually was recommended by his oncologist to see a mental health provider back when we were married. Yeah, he went through some cancer treatments. So his behavior was kind of concerning. He was, I don't know what's the term for each state, but he was considered at risk to himself when he was hospitalized. And there's mental health issue involved, but he refused to see a provider.
He was not on antidepressants of some sort.
No.
Okay, I've got a container full of them for my wife, the stuff that was scrolled around the house. I bring that up because I kind of figured that this is, we just had a shooting in New York State. Was it yesterday, the day before? It was yesterday. I think that there's so many pharmaceuticals and antidepressants that work in so many of these things. And it's really well hit. If I'm right, it's there and it's hidden because that stuff's private and information doesn't get out. But I mean, you know, this is from at least 2 different doctors.
Yeah, I mean, my ex was on opioids and benzodiazepines. It's not really, I mean, he gives different reason to get those prescriptions, but he's on medications for sure. But it just,
I don't think that's quite the same as some of the other stuff that's out there. So I'd be at least happy to hear that at the very least. Not that, I guess, cold comfort.
So in the chat room, I saw Cedric said this is a standard narcissistic behavior, and as a majority, if not all of the parents doing this to the kids and the previous spouses have traits within the cluster B, which contain narcissism, and flying monkeys are very common in our situation. And I also see a lot of other situations here. For example, one of the parents said, my child attempted to murder me and now the child is now facing charges. Dr. Bernet, would you like to comment anything about the flying monkey, or, you know, the mudslinging attempt to get other people involved in this campaign of alienation?
Yeah, both Jing and Jason described that. And you know, the average alienator is a very determined person, and frequently they're very outgoing and they're very convincing, and they set about roping other people into the scheme. And sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's the grandparent or the new wife, or the other people, of course, are the school teachers and the doctors. But perhaps the most troublesome is that they have their own therapist, and they have the child has a therapist, and then they convince the therapist of the legitimacy of their position. And the therapist doesn't do anything. The therapist never says, oh, by the way, you know, maybe I should talk to the other parent so I can get a, you know, you can always word it somehow. You can say, well, I need to talk to the other parent so I can have a better understanding of what's happening. But obviously, therapists who see children should be talking to both of the parents and really find out the whole story. But I think what the basic idea is, as Petra said, these people are really, really good at socializing and getting other people involved on their behalf.
Right. Actually, Jing's husband has so many creative stories that when I interviewed his friends and relatives and people that consider him like really good friends, there are facts that they got shocked when they found out. So for example, Jing's husband, one of his dreams, well, ex-husband, I apologize. One of his dreams since he was little child is to be in the military. unfortunately, he has a heart condition that prevented him from being able to join the military. So then he walked around wearing the army, clothing all the time. And then he would go and perpetrate this story that he used to be in the army. And to the point that people actually thought that he was in the army. So then they would, and I interviewed one of the person that actually considered herself as a really good friend of him. And she would say things like, yeah, because he was trained in the army, so that's why he was so harsh to Thai, blah, blah, blah. And I let her carry on with this conversation. And then at one point I quietly said, actually, he was never been in the army. And she just so shocked. And you just see how heartbroken she was that he lied to her so much throughout this relationship that she had with him, that she never knew that this persona that he was an ex-military was almost like the foundation of what she saw him as. And then suddenly to get it pulled under her, it was like, she was so heartbreaking to find out. So they were so good. They were so creative in creating these false narratives. And then I saw in the chat room, Brianne, I think, said, yes, the therapist is definitely capable. Okay, so we talk about the flying monkeys. I want to go into the next thing. I wanted to talk about the targeted parents experience, because Jing's situation, I have no idea how she's still standing, but she went through the most crazy things throughout these years, and it felt like it was never going to end. And at many points, her life was threatened. Like her existence was threatened. She was threatened to be killed. So how did you feel, Jing? And how did it feel like going through this? And I know many of our audience are experiencing this.
Yeah, it was quite harsh 2 years. I guess when you're a mother, you just never would voluntarily give up. Even my therapist was like, do you think you just want to step away for a bit? And I was like, you've seen so many of these cases. Have you ever seen a mother just walk away? So it was, very harsh. And especially when you feel like all the systems and all the people that's supposed to help you just never could see the facts, and you just get knocked down when every single time you try to do something right. And especially then with Thai, and I tried, so because of domestic violence and all the threats, and me and my now husband and boyfriend, we constantly live in this fear that it, like Petra said, he presents you to be this very militant. He always had guns and knives and very into all these weapons. So there's this great fear, although the police and rest of the authorities never could recognize that, we are constantly have had fears that one day we walk out the door, we're just gonna be shot or stabbed. So there was never a time that I could just walk to his door and knock on the door and try to get Thai on my parenting time. Is just impossible. And then the only time that I would try to get Thai, when he kind of refused allowing me to have parenting time, and the only time I really could is just go to the school ground and try to get Thai after his school, because we have a protection order, or I have one against him. So I knew he wouldn't voluntarily just show up. And that's probably why the ex-wife was, or his wife, then wife, late, was being on the school ground on his behalf. But it was, it just, when you're a mother and you just keep trying and trying and trying and think that's the best you could do for your son, and hoping when he, eventually he will turn 18 and be away from this abuser, and hopefully you can somehow patch him up and fix him up and he'll still be successful later. But you just hope for the best. And really, there was never a sure answer, but just a mother, I guess.
Did you feel like you have the support from society
No,
or resources out there that are available for you?
well, I had my therapist, and which helped for sure. I mean, but it's just, you know, it's this whole process, and especially the court system, I just never had any hope. And after the motions got denied and denied, you try to lay out the facts that how you being alienated, you're being harassed and threatened all the time, and they feel like you're just this mother and trying to win this custody, and then nobody take you seriously, and you just become this ultimate bad person because they just never acknowledge your concerns. So friends, yeah, people knew me, they knew that none of the stuff was going on per my ex's claim, but the bad part is, you know, the authorities, the DHS and the court system are the ones that actually make the ultimate decisions, and none of those people really was able to help me any.
And this question goes to our audience that are watching. I would love to hear, what is your experience like? You know, how do you feel going through this process? Do you feel like you have support from your family, friends, from society? Because what I have found from interviewing, you know, by now about 1,000 cases, is that a lot of the time, first of all, targeted parents don't even know what they're looking at. They never heard of parental alienation before. They felt like what they're going through is so shocking that they just couldn't even comprehend, like, why is this stuff being said about me? Like, it's sort of beyond comprehension. And then on top of that, society has this habit of victim blaming. So when a parent, if someone claims that you are not, that the child doesn't want you, they immediately turn around and blame you and say, oh, you must be a bad parent, and somehow, you know, like maybe not to your face, but you can tell that they are blaming the targeted parents. And then on top of that, there's usually no resources. There's no hotlines, there's no shelter. You know, I saw Bernet in the chat room said, you've been labeled a cray one. Yeah, there's no resources in the system to support these victims, these parents. So I want to hear, you know, Julie in the chat room said no support at all. Even friends were deceived by my ex and I'm completely alone. You know, what you are going through is so traumatic, and yet there's no support system. And by the way, May is a mental health awareness month. And you know what? There's no recognition whatsoever for the trauma and the complex PTSD that targeted parents and the alienated children are experiencing. And Jason, I wonder if you could share, how did you feel going through fighting these court cases and the protective order against you and all that? Did you feel like you have support? How did you feel? And, you know, anything you wanted to comment?
I felt there is no support. You're gonna have to find that on your own, and that's gonna come from friends and family. That's gonna come from, in my case, and not to, you know, get too political, podcasts got me through so much while I was getting divorced, that kind of, there was so much help for me that cushioned the blow, you know, when my kids' deaths finally came. That was extraordinarily helpful. I was kind of becoming a more you know, a prepared person without realizing it. As far as the victimhood, as much as things suck, as difficult as they are to get by, you know, I just hit the 2-year anniversary on the 27th of April. I'm not the victim. I'm living with it, but my kids were the victims. I'm not that relevant. I'm not the hero. You know, I want people to feel sorry for me. I want people to ask me about my kids. You know?
Dr. Bernet, would you like to comment about the experience of the targeted parent?
Yeah, it of course is really a hopeless feeling and a discouragement. But I guess I've given this advice to targeted parents is before. I mean, you're in a horrible situation, but you really have to build your own support network. is the government isn't going to do it. The judge maybe or maybe not will understand. Your attorney, I guess, is a paid support person, but you really need to find people in your community, like in your family and in your friends and in your work or in your church, people who really agree with you 100%, people who don't doubt you, people who don't believe all the false narratives and so on. And I think. I think sometimes targeted parents kind of go down a road and they kind of are help us, but you're not really helpless. I mean, you can create a network of your own, and I guess some of the websites are helpful. But anyway, I guess that's my advice for people who are listening who are feeling desperate.
Yeah, that's certainly, I think what you described is the way things certainly have been. And going forward, there's no reason why those of us who have been down this road can't come up with something that can help those folks going forward. So there's more out there for them, even if it's, hey, let's start with the divorce process itself and address that. Just because you're going through divorce doesn't mean you're going to end up in a Zoom meeting like me and Jen talking to Dr. Petra. That's pretty atypical. And I'd be happy to help with that. In terms of the courts, though, the courts did listen to me. I felt listened to. I really, really did. And I think part of that is because they've heard it all before, right? Jing was talking about how her husband, ex-husband, was throwing this stuff out far and wide to everyone, involved, Child Protective Services up and down, everyone. Jing, that's not their first go around. They're used to it. They see it all the time. They know pretty well what's BS and what's not, I feel. After this stuff, they started this ball rolling with me. They did it by, my wife took my little girl and said, she told me that, Daddy touched her or whatever. And the doctor did the right thing and called the police and called Child Protective Services. And the police interviewed my little girl and said there's nothing there. And they CPS interviewed her and they said there's nothing there. But they don't show up in court when you get in there for a temporary restraining order. But the fact they don't show up says a lot. And we don't know that when we're going in there, but the attorneys do and the judges certainly do. Where's the police report? Oh, there isn't one. Okay, that means something. They know what that means. So it's our first time in that room, but it's not everyone else's first time in that room too. And the fact that CPS doesn't show up, they know what that means at the same time. So for us, it is really overwhelming. And maybe that's the lessons that we need to be giving other folks going forward, if they end up going down this road as well. And so anyway,
yeah, so
that makes sense, I hope.
Yeah, before we go into the system aspect of it and the court aspect of it, I wanted to at least sort of summarize the part about the experience of the target parents. And as a lot of people comment in the chat room about how they experience similar feeling of loneliness and helplessness, is that one thing that Jason pointed out is, for example, he listened to a lot of podcasts and that helped him. We saw this tiger behind him, right? So, and Dr. Bernet talked about the support system. Jing also had friends that understood. So it's very important for you. I know how you feel as a target parent. The experience that you are going through is traumatic. It's horrific, but it's very important to, one, self-education is very important. You need to try to learn as much as you can about family dynamic, about parenting in difficult situations, about coping with trauma, about healing, about all of this, about how to deal with narcissistic behaviors, about setting boundary, about self-confidence, about handling the court system, all of that. I know it's a lot to ask. Another part of it is, yeah, definitely build your support system. There are support systems out there. We do have support group, private support group. We are building, local meeting clubs, things like that. There are other places. So definitely look for people that understand you, people that support you, because you need this. You definitely need this. So definitely, we understand how you feel, but that feelings are not valid. You are not alone. You are definitely not alone. So I wanted to highlight that before we go into the next part, which is I want to talk about is the court system and the system itself. So with Jing's case, and Jason brought out something really important, which is a lot of these people actually have dealt with this, and a lot of them do recognize this. So with Jing's case, for example, somewhere in the middle of the case, way before it ended up tragically, there was actually a police report by a detective, and I did end up interviewing that detective. She looked at this and she said, "This is really strange what he's doing. This is really wrong." So she ended up calling this detective from the local, police department, called up the CPS and said, "What he's doing here, I can see it. It is not right. He's preventing her from, having the child, and he lied and all this stuff." And the CPS said, "What you are saying, it's the right term for it is parental alienation." So both the police department and the CPS are aware that this is a parental alienation case. But yet this case got dragged out and dragged out and dragged out for 5 years. And then eventually the system did finally recognize it. And like Jing said, she trying to get hearing and nobody listened to her, and it got dragged out for 5 years. And then finally, the very final case, Jing went to court and finally got her day in court, where the judge said, "This is the most horrific case of parental alienation I ever experienced. You and your new wife are destroying this child, and I don't know if we can even fix this. I'm going to think about this. I'm going to try to figure out a way of solving this." And the mother had lost hundreds of days of her time with the child. She hadn't seen Jing hadn't seen Tai for like 2 years. "And I'm going to try to figure out to create some kind of make-up time. I'm going to think about it tonight. And maybe in the morning, we're going to get the mother to reunite with the child." And guess what happened that night? And the same with Jason. Jason was going to pick up his children. He finally got the system to recognize and said, "Okay, you can have your children." And Jason went to pick up the children. And guess what? This is how it ended. So the system has to do better. We need to do better. So I'm curious, Jing, do you think that it would lead to this tragic end if somehow the system recognizes and prevented him to carry on with this kind of behavior much earlier? Do you think it would have ended this way?
No, I mean, the judge heard that day at the court. We had a hearing all day, and then in the afternoon, after lunch break, and she had a CPS staff sitting in the courtroom the whole afternoon. And then so she said she had those people in there just because she had concern about the neglect. Has to be some kind of neglect issue that she was concerned. And then she said she was actually considering have Tai removed by the end of that court hearing day, and then just completely take Tai out of Anthony's house. But then for some reason she changed her mind. And then when we after the court hearing ended, we even talked about it, like we kind of concerned about Tai's well-being that night. And then she, being a judge, actually, she mentioned she has a psychology background, like education on that, and she got a degree of some kind of psychology. So she even with that, and she still felt like Tai would be safe that night, which is kind of, out of all the judges who didn't do anything. And then we finally got this judge who recognized it, and then she got other degrees than supposedly try to figure out this, abusive, narcissistic parent. And then still it didn't happen. And just like very disappointed, hopeless. Felt like our system is just not having the right people in the right chair to take care of issues like this, or I don't know. It's just many in the CPS. That's just another very disappointing whole story about that. So yeah, I don't know the solution for all that.
Right. So the system failed Jing and Tai over and over again for many years. And then even when they finally recognize that there's a problem here, they still leave the child with, and not to mention, during that court hearing, Jing's new husband actually voiced his concern. He actually said, I am concerned for the safety of Tai and of Jing and of myself and my new child. And yet still the child is left with an abuser, which end up with this tragic ending. For some people actually ask if Tai committed suicide. No, his father shot him and then shot himself. Jason, what about your situation? Do you want to comment how the system played in this situation? Was there anything that could have done differently that could have prevented this?
Yeah, the decision, the judge's decision when the report finally came back from the psychologist and he had to rule on the restraining order. His rule that he came out with on a Friday afternoon was basically that there was going to be a slap on the wrist for my wife, and it was going to amend the schedule of visitation, and we're going to lose your divorce case. I think I lost everyone here. Can anyone hear me? You guys hear me all right?
It was a little bit breaking, but we can hear some of it.
Okay. For me, it was mostly the timing, right? So the judge's decision that came out, like I said, on a Friday afternoon, this is during COVID, so it was all virtual, was, slap on the wrist, change of visitation. You're probably going to lose your divorce case. You look really bad now, but it was nothing. It was nothing but an excuse to panic. And if he had waited till Monday, I would have had the kids at that point. If he'd waited till Monday, because the next day we were supposed to pick him up. I showed up for the pickup spot. They didn't show up. I start calling my wife, and it rings 6 times, and it goes to voicemail. It does it every time. And I'm starting to panic, and I'm still 5 hours away from San Antonio, Texas at that point. And time goes by, and also we're in the car, and we're thinking the worst. We thought they were going to run. We thought they were going to make a run to get out of the United States at first. If he had waited till Monday, it wouldn't have happened. If he had waited back outside of then it wouldn't have happened. Is there any reason why the judge, to play it safe, right? Worst case scenario, get the kids changed over first before you start bringing the hammer down on anybody. Would that have made a difference, for Jing? What were the circumstances at that point? Jing, how long ago was it that this happened?
September 2019.
Okay. Very sorry, by the way.
Sorry about your case.
Yours was about 6 months before mine. So, was there any reason why he couldn't have, if he was that concerned about the amount of time that your son had with you, why he couldn't have made that transition over before he brought the hammer down?
I don't know. I don't know what.
Yeah.
Very disappointing.
Yeah. In my case,
a really good point. And this is just a little detail as to when and how does the judge announce their decision. Yeah. And the principle is the child needs to be in a safe place with safe people, and then the judge says something or the decision, and then the child is safely transferred to whatever home it's going to be. And because this has happened on other occasions, that the judge makes the announcement and the parent goes home and kills the child. I mean, it's not the first time. So that's just a little tiny, we're talking about systems change. That's a little tiny systems issue.
I don't mean to be cruel about it, but what are the statistics on it? Well, how often does this kind of thing happen in a divorce case?
There are lots of things that happen. Sometimes the alienating parent kills the alienated parent. Sometimes this happens, but I don't know exactly how many. I mentioned the research a minute ago, and we're trying to accumulate cases and seeing if there's a pattern. But the idea of killing the children and then yourself happens. on a rare occasions, the child gets so roped into this that the child kills the alienated parent. That's a horrible thing. That also
Really?
happens
Yeah,
in Texas.
yeah.
That's a Texas thing. So there are different kinds of ways it plays out, and it needs to be studied in a more systematic manner.
So we have in the chat room, Mia Lin mentioned about John Marsh case, which is also another tragic case where he was accused, with false allegation after false, like just for a long time, so many false allegations. And as soon as he cleared his name with one, he get accused of the next and the next and the next, and he get dragged out. And then he finally got his name clear and finally was allowed to go and pick up his children. He turned up to pick up his children, and the ex-wife's father killed him. Now, we saw in the chat room, Brian said, Petra, you described my case to a T. The judge even put in the custody order that there was severe alienation by the father, and yet my kids were still being left with the father, and then my son tried to murder me during a custody exchange. And so her son is now face charges for murder. So it's really tragic, and it does happen. Unfortunately, the system is not equipped to deal with this case properly, and we really need to change that. And like Dr. Bernet was talking about, we are undertaking a research study into this. So for any parents out there or anyone that listening, if you know of a case, please let us know, because we really want to do study onto this. So please let us know. Whether it's a parent that's killed or the child was killed or anything, or there's attempted murder, we wanted to know about it. If there was suicide due to parental alienation, we want to know about it. So please do let us know. I wanted to address another aspect of this is in terms of who was being killed. So in Jing's case, I know that, I shouldn't say I know, from my research, from all the speculation, I'm pretty confident that if he could access and kill Jing, he would have rather killed Jing. But unfortunately, Jing was in her home and she has weapon. He knew this, and he was not able to access Jing. So the child become the vulnerable victim in this situation. I wonder, Jing, if you could confirm your thought about this, like whether you agree with this or any other things.
I feel like that's very, I can't say I know what he was thinking, but I felt like the ultimate goal is to hurt me. But I feel like he felt like if he took Ty's life instead of mine, I would suffer more. So I think that's, instead of taking a chance and try to kill me and my husband, that along that line, he might get killed instead. So I think he just wanted me to suffer the most if he could.
I think that's same over here too. It is, I'm gonna make you suffer as terribly as I possibly can. This is how I'm gonna do it.
Right. I'm so sorry. There was a say that said, I forgot where I read it, where it said a cause it doesn't mean that a cause is right when somebody died for it. So in this case, Jing's ex-husband and Jason's wife both end up killed themselves, but it doesn't mean what they did is anything heroic or true. I don't know if Dr. Bernet, if you wanted to comment in anything more into that aspect of who getting killed, but I think
not that, but I do have some thoughts about the system, changing the system. Is this a good time for that topic?
Please.
There are other people who have studied this and have come up with suggestions. And the most obvious one is to catch these cases early or even prevent them from starting in the first place. They need to be identified when it's mild parental alienation, not after it has progressed to these horrible situations. And so that involves educating the social workers, the psychologists, the judges, and so on and so on. So that's a systems thing that needs to happen. There's a second systems thing that has been proposed, is to not have divorce occur in an adversarial setting, like family court, is to change the way family court is done and to change it into mandatory mediation. In other words, rather than go to court and say what a horrible person your ex is, that you're required to go to mediation and try to work out a plan that might help everybody. Now, that might not work in these extreme cases. In other words, if you have a parent who has a personality disorder and is determined to damage the other parent, then the mediation is not going to work either. But in more mild cases. Let me mention one final thought that I have about the system, and it has to do with attorneys. Is it ethical for an attorney to represent a parent who is engaging in repetitive, severe, alienating behaviors, and which we consider child abuse? In other words, all this stuff we've been talking about, severe alienating behaviors, is a form of child abuse. Now, attorneys can represent clients who have committed crimes. That's okay. We know that. But is it unethical for an attorney to represent a client who is now committing a crime and who plans to commit further crimes? I don't think that's ethical. And secondly, is it ethical to allow a client to commit perjury and to go and testify about lies that the attorney knows are lies? I don't think that's ethical either. And I'm involved in another project where we're going to go after this. We're going to study the ethical principles of attorneys and point out that it is unethical to actively represent a person who's actively committing child abuse. That it just doesn't make any sense to allow that to happen. In other words, the attorneys have to find some other solution for their cases to get resolved. So anyway, those are a couple of systemic things which are down the road, and maybe at some point we'll get to them also.
Yeah, and so in the chat room, I see Kareem said that's a great point. I see Caroline said, I agree, it's not ethical. Stuart said, is it ethical to allow lawyers to draft law that benefits them? And then Claudia actually brought up a really good point that said perjury is criminal and parents really need to learn how to enforce false allegation and false reporting. So that brings me back to a point that I actually forgot to mention, is that both of these cases involve a lot of false allegation and perjury. And we see this very common in these cases, that false allegation is almost like a very handy tool for alienators to use. And yet the system, there are laws in place that consider perjury a criminal activity, the same with custody interference is a criminal activity. And yet when it is determined that has been lies and false allegation, the system do very little to punish the accuser, the criminals. And that's a very big problem with the system. Like, not even talking about changing the law. How about enforcing the law that we already have in place? They're not doing that. Jason, do you have a comment?
They do it. They'll do it in one direction. They'll enforce, rules about custody against men. But if a woman wants to keep the kids longer, and the husband, the father calls about it, a lot of times they'll just not do anything. They'll say, we'll just let the court handle this. But they'll go after a guy if he's got kids.
Jason, I wonder if you
tries to keep him an extra weekend. They'll come after you quick. So it's also selective enforcement. I'm sorry, Petra, did we break up?
Yeah, I think
where's my internet?
I think you break up, you get up a little bit, and I apologize. I didn't realize it, so I kind of jump on to what you were trying to say. But I think what you were trying to say, that the system is biased.
No, I'm sure the problem's on that's what. It's selective in its enforcement. So I've read lots of stories about women who will blow off custody agreements and keep the kids longer. And a father will complain and the police won't do anything. But if it's the other way around, they'll march in and grab kids out and they'll call Child Protective Services. So my poor connection.
Yeah, so the system is actually, like Jason mentioned, the system is actually really bad at enforcing things appropriately. And I don't think it's the gender issue. I've ran into a lot of mothers who face challenges when when the ex-husband withholding the child. So it happened to both mothers and fathers. And yeah, the system is biased in some way, but it's not consistently in terms of the gender. It's not a gender issue at all. And Jason, I think your connections are very good, unfortunately, but when you could get on, I wonder if you're comfortable to comment anything about your your wife's attorney. You may not be comfortable, so I'm going to leave it up to you, because Dr. Bernet just talked about how it's not right for lawyers to empowering people that commit child abuse. So I don't know if you're comfortable to comment anything there. I think his connection is not good, so he may not be able to hear me, and he may not be able to talk about it. I know certain details about his case, about the wife's lawyers, but let's just leave that out. Jing, do you have any comment that you think in terms of Anthony's, like your ex-husband's lawyers?
I think it's hard for me to say. There's that confidentiality I'm sure they all have between the lawyers and the clients, but I feel like so at the beginning of the DHS case, and there was one incident happened where my ex made a comment to the visitation therapist or visitation supervisor for the visitation, the parenting time, during the parenting time. He made a comment that he said he has cares for Ty lined up if both of the parents are killed, which alarmed the therapist or the supervisor, like he might be homicidal. And then shortly after that, Anthony's attorney tried to withdraw the case, but then somehow it did not happen. So I think there's always some, like, I feel like those people have seen enough cases and heard stories, and there's certain behaviors that they're kind of aware, but then there's also that, you know, you do what your clients want you to do almost. There's that ethical guideline, whether I agree or not. You know, I don't know if that's true.
No, there is such a thing, Jean. I think it's called zealous advocacy, that attorneys are expected to engage in zealous advocacy on behalf of their client. But I don't think that includes committing crimes. An attorney is not permitted to help people commit a crime.
Okay. So
including perjury. I don't think attorneys are allowed to let their clients commit perjury.
Yeah.
And if the attorney knows that's happening, attorneys can withdraw from representing that person.
Okay. There got to be a reason that I know there was a motion filed, but it didn't carry on, go through. But then my ex was such a, you know, Petra heard stories. He's such a good liar. He can make up stories and, you know, manipulate things and twist things around. So I feel like even if there was any questions, he might have got away of covering himself. I mean, yes. He had so many different therapists, even my son's and his therapist, and he can manipulate those people who's supposed to be, you know, very good at their job and dealing with this particular issues. And then he always got away from things. So, you know, it's hard to say.
I wanted to address one question in the comment in the chat room that is specifically directed to me. So Allison said, my issue with Dr. Petra is that has she gone to court to support any parents? So I have never personally appeared in court to testify, but I have helped many parents to fight to get their children back. I have had cases where I even got the guardian ad litem sanction, and the guardian ad litem had to pay a fine to the parent. I have had cases where the judges had to recuse himself from the case because I was able to help the parent prove that this judge was being biased and unethical. I wanted to say that I have not gained any money out of any of these cases that I help. Today, I don't personally help individual cases because I realize that I need to put more attention to focus on a broader education so that I can help more parents. I did help individual cases early on because I wanted to learn the system, and I want to learn these cases. And I wanted to also say that I was previously an alienated mother, and I won my case and got my children back. So I do have personal experience on this. And like, you know, I am an alienated child. I am an adult alienated child. So I understand this, not just from the intellectual level, but viscerally, I understand this. And I walk through this process with a lot of parents. And I know there's that question, so I wanted to address that. So today we have addressed a lot of different things. We address the characteristic of the alienators. We talk about the children, you know, their experience a little bit. We talk about the experience of the targeted parents, what they're going through. We talk about the alienating behaviors. We talk about the system failure. I wonder, what are some other topics that we should have, like what did I miss that we should add before we go? I know this has been running quite long, and we're kind of running out of time. So if there's any question in the chat room or, you know, among us here, do you have any suggestion on any other topic that I may have missed?
I'll just comment that the people who study this have made lots of progress in terms of research and getting things published in important journals, in peer-reviewed journals, and writing books and giving presentations and in winning cases in court. So there has been progress over the last 5-10 years regarding this topic, but we still have work to do. We still have to educate, hardcore education of therapists, social workers, psychologists, attorneys, and judges. And so obviously we're not at the end of the road yet, but I just want to emphasize that there has been progress made in these areas, but we need to do more.
Right. Yeah, like Dr. Bernet said, there's have been a lot of progress, and it's not completely hopeless and completely helpless, because we know a lot of parents that got their children back. And when you do get your children back, you can rebuild your relationship so much stronger, so much more meaningful, so much more valuable. So the biggest thing is do not give up hope. That's definitely something that I would say first and foremost. And take care of yourself while you're fighting this. I wonder, Jing, do you have any the last thoughts that you wanted to share with parents here?
Oh gosh, I just hope everybody have a happier ending on my story. But there's different scenarios. Mine's involved with domestic violence, so I only know a very small portion of this kind of cases. So I'm sure everybody is having a very hard time dealing with this. But try to stay strong, and I hope the best for everyone.
Thank you. What about you, Jason?
There's no reason to go into a divorce or through the process. I don't care which party you are. I don't care if you have kids or not. It doesn't matter. There's no reason to go into this feeling like you're prepared if all of you've got is some history in your family or yourself or your friends that's not adequate. There should be a guidebook for this. There should be something besides this tribal information that we throw at each other and horrible ways of dealing with it. There really should be something that says, hey, this is how it works. Usually this is in your state. Find support group now. Find people who are not lawyers but are very familiar. Maybe they are lawyers. Maybe get that support group now and get going. And above all, mind your darn behavior.
I think Jason is cutting out.
Build a business and do well, but even if you know there's allegations, there's domestic disputes or gambling or drugs, get help and try and get through as possible as well as you can. And if that means that, you know, other people have to develop some of those, I think to a great extent we get into these horrible.
Okay.
Yeah, Boston.
I think we lost Jason because his connection is not very good. But I wanted to really, I'm so grateful, Jing and Jason, for being here and for sharing their stories. Really, they're really heartbreaking story, and you guys are so strong, and we're very grateful for you. And thank you, Dr. Bernet, for being here and shared your wisdom and your insight into this. Thank you, all the parents and everyone that are watching. If you could please help us by liking this video, by sharing this video. If you are not comfortable sharing it on your personal profile, please share it in different Facebook groups that you are in, sharing with people, that family members or friends that you know. And if you have more questions, please feel free to post it in the comment, because we're going to try and go through and see if we can help you address any of that. For some of the people that might be familiar, we are currently trying to figure out how to deal with the situation with a law that recently passed that actually really had very serious implication to victims of parental alienation. It's called the Cadence Law. And so you guys seen a video that I've done, and if you haven't, please check it out. But we're gonna create some more tools for parents to help to participate to fight this this law that had really serious consequences for victims of parental alienation. So thank you so much for being here. Please join our mailing list if you're not already there. We are on victimtohero.com. If you go onto the website, on the right-hand side at the top, you will be able to put your email address in so that you can join our mailing list, so you can get informed about all these programs that we have. So thank you so much, and have a wonderful, wonderful day. We appreciate you to be a part of this community.